Mark Hambley now calls Springfield home, but he spent over 3 decades in the diplomatic corps, including postings as United States ambassador to Qatar and in Lebanon. Ambassador Hambley knows the Middle East, and we asked him for his perspective on the U.S. halt taking refugees from 7 nations in that region and more.
Well, I think certainly there's been a strong reaction to what happened last November in the U.S. Because it was so unexpected, as was the United States too, a big surprise for everybody. But I think as well, if they look at their own countries and Britain as well, Brexit was a huge earthquake politically. In Romania at the moment, there's a huge earthquake going on there now, and Italy as well. France, I haven't France about to have an election in about 90 days, and they're in chaos. So I think when they look to us, they look for us always being the source of real stability, and so that they don't think we're as stable anymore as we were in the past.
One of the things that has people talking, wondering, questioning, President Trump's executive order, a temporary stop, I won't use the word ban because he says it's not a ban, though he has used the word, but a stop on immigration of refugees from 7 Middle Eastern and African nations, largely Muslim in population, but the administration says, no, it's not aimed specifically at Muslims. Your basic reaction to this? You have lived in that part of the world.
I think certainly the president is to be applauded, as any president should be, for wanting to defend our country. This is his main responsibility, to keep us safe and secure. I think this particular policy to the ban or pause, I like the term pause, which Secretary Kelly used, hope it's a pause, was not to let any refugees from Syria specifically into the country, refugees be able to process. And that's unfortunate in and of itself, because refugees are the most scrutinized immigrants to the U.S. They have Department of Homeland Security, they have counterterrorism, they have the State Department. Everybody looks at their backgrounds to make sure we only get in people who are not going to be creating problems in the future if they come in as a refugee. And most of these people are the most vulnerable people. Women who've been raped, children who have lost their relatives, people who are marginalized from communities who've been like the Yazidis or the Christian communities, or some of the Sunnis or Shiites who have been abused by one section or the other in that awful civil war.
How is it being read in the capitals, not only of those nations, but throughout the Arab and Muslim world, the Middle East?
I think there's a lot of anger. Governments, of course, will take their own assessment. They don't like it. Iran is already retaliating by banning all U.S. citizens, including American wrestling teams going out for world championships in Iran. They have now been banned for participating in that. Other countries, I don't know what their position is. We don't have relations or embassies in Syria, Damascus, or in Mogadishu, a very small embassy. So I don't know what action they will take in terms of our national Sudan relationship with them either. But the difficulty is the message sends to young people, particularly those who are already, frankly, very negative towards the United States, towards the West, because of the propaganda of the Islamic State, which says the West is out to destroy us as a religion, as a society. That's the message that indeed this is true.
So then those who have opposed this and said it's a recruiting tool for ISIS, for Daesh, as they're called in the Arab world, you would agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the difficulty is we all want to end this blight of terrorism. And there's ways we can do that much more effectively than by having this pause on visas against majority Islamic countries. We have to get to the young people. We've got to attack the internet, which is sending out very powerful messages to young people. Even now, though the Islamic State is on its perhaps the last formal stages as being an organized state, there will be continuing terrorism in these groups who operate in the ether world of cyberspace.
Iran. Last weekend, they set off a ballistic missile. The Trump administration interprets that as a violation of the agreement that's been put in place, an international agreement. The National Security Advisor went and made a very quick, very blunt statement where he said, Iran, you're on notice. And that was it. We now have seen some more sanctions against individuals who dealt with Iran, Iranians, and some of the businesses involved in the development of this missile. That's a very tense situation, it seems.
It is a tense situation. Iran, our relationship with Iran has always been a very tenuous one since 1979. But that said, this statement, you want us to be very careful about making threats. You don't have those red lines and we don't follow them, because you may set us up in a situation where we'll have a confrontation with Iran, which I don't think anyone really wants. Certainly, that agreement, I think Donald Trump administration does not like that agreement very much. I think it was a good agreement in the sense we all know Iran wants to get the bomb, but this is 25 years of close monitoring to make sure they don't have it. During that 25 years, there will be changes in Iran. Young people have a different view than the ruling theocracy, which has become very corrupt, very sclerotic. It is something that if we gave them time, I think we'd see change in Iran, which would be sort of a regime change, rather than having one which I think some in the administration want to see happen now. And certainly to try and think we're going to engage them on a military basis and come out of that without any scars in ourselves, it will not happen.
As someone who served many years as part of the State Department, let me ask you, there is now a new Secretary of State in place. A gentleman comes in from the business world. He certainly is well-traveled and well-versed internationally, former president of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson. Not direct diplomatic experience, and there's concern about a close association and friendship he apparently has with the leader of our chief adversary on the world stage, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. What's your read of that situation and that gentleman in that spot?
I personally think that Rex Tillerson was a good appointment. He's a strong individual. He's independent. He's an individual who has negotiated in many different countries in difficult circumstances for the betterment of his company. And certainly ExxonMobil is a massive, massive company. Certainly has a good relationship with Putin. Or to get the deals he wanted to get for Exxon in Russia, he had to have a good relationship with President Putin. I think that shows he can deal with anybody. In a way, he will know what the interests of the United States are, and he'll work those interests very, very strongly. I think is a good appointment.
Let me take you quickly to another part of the world that Americans don't think about a lot. Maybe we should. They're a close, staunch ally. Australia, apparently a strange phone call between the president and the prime minister of Australia. The president's upset about a treaty that goes back to the Obama administration. We would take some refugees, some displaced persons who are originally from, I guess, Syria in the Middle East. And apparently President Trump, it's reported, said, you could be sending me the next Boston bomber. Reportedly, the conversation did not go well. As someone who's been involved in this world of diplomacy, what do you make of that and the entire situation that seems to have developed?
Again, our president is a man who speaks his mind. I think we get very used to that. He's a very smart man. Donald Trump is no fool. I mean, I think people who depict him that he's a buffoon are wrong. I think he's a man that has been very successful in business. He's had his failings. He's come back from them. I think his heart's in the right place. He wants to defend our country again from agreements he thinks which are not good ones. This was not an agreement which John Kerry signed with Australians. It had been a treaty, but had gone to the U.S. Senate for approval, would not have been approved. 2/3 majority vote would probably not have been secured. And I don't know the details of that agreement, what timing was to get these people in. They've certainly been vetted very carefully before they came here. These are people who floated up on boats into Australia, and they don't keep them in Australia itself. It's often these rather awful camps offshore in Nauru and in Papua New Guinea. And these people, frankly, they have to do something about eliminating this number of people, and they're trying to go with their allies and put them in places that will accept them. We should keep in mind that for those terrorists who were in Guantanamo, when we release them to get them down those numbers, we were placing them in places like Micronesia, Uruguay, far from the countries of origin to keep them out of harm's way. And the guy in Uruguay, of course, escaped someplace. I guess the guys in Micronesia are still there. But so countries do try to make arrangements to help other countries. And we have such a close relationship with Australia. They fought with us in every war when others didn't want to, from Vietnam on. Unlike Canada, which is withdrawn from Islamic State, the fight against them, against ISIS. So they've been very good allies. And I would hope that this is just maybe a little, tempest in a teapot. I think Malcolm Turnbull is trying to play it down a bit. And I hope there's another conversation which will be a little more civil and positive on both sides.
Ambassador Mark Hambley, thanks for coming in and sharing your knowledge with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Jim.